Old cars roaring and a rumbling past my door. Now they're standing rusty, rolling empty, and yelling in, don't stop here anymore.
When the 2132 was built in the early 20s, it was, the railroads were just like, you know, amazingly ingrained in America, and Corbin was no different. And this particular engine was built to handle yard switching. It was designed for that, and that's what it did for the L&N. It was just a workaday locomotive back then, but now it is a very rare and significant artifact that survives amazingly. This is the reason Corbin exists, is the railroad. The railroads came, the line to Norton, Virginia, the Cumberland Valley Division, was initiated in 1886, and eventually the L&N had its own main line all the way to Atlanta. It literally built Corbin.
We are at a mecca of railroading at its heyday, and Corbin was actually home to the largest coal wash facility in the United States at one point. The Corbin Yard, operated by L&N, is one of the most expansive, and probably the most expansive, coal railroading yards, with a number of tracks and opportunities for maintenance, reconstruction, locomotive reconstruction, passenger car reconstruction, and freight car reconstruction. The facilities here are giant and span miles worth of track and hundreds of jobs.
Corbin was founded by the L&N Railroad. Really and truly, the only reason that Corbin exists is because the L&N Railroad came through. You know, the railroad came through and purchased some properties and laid the track, and then all of a sudden the city started to grow up around it. So it is the heritage of the Corbin people and the city itself that rests on the railroad. And so it's really, the railroad is ingrained in everything Corbin.
The community of Corbin was very slow to develop initially, as much of eastern Kentucky was. Once the railroad arrived in the late 1800s, you know, the depot sprang up and we started to see passengers in and out. So at that point, we saw a thriving town constructed adjacent to the L&N line. That town would eventually grow to include a giant population of people. People were transported in and out again by rail and then eventually by road. But we saw workers begin to move into town for the L&N jobs that were available at that point. There were sections of row houses. There were communities of folks who shared the same job duties within the railroad.
What you want with your mama?
There were 400 locomotives built at South Louisville, and they were different types. There were Pacific type passenger locomotives, freight Mikados that were used in low-speed drag service, like in coal service. There were 280s or consolidation type locomotives. Lots of different designs, lots of different classes, but the 2132 is a C1 class, 080. The remarkable thing is that it exists, and it's the only South Louisville built locomotive that still exists.
So literally there are only a few steam locomotives produced after her that remained. And I speak of her in a term like that because to me, she's not an inanimate object. L&N 2132 is a heart, is a soul, and she cries to the people of Appalachian Kentucky to tell the story of railroading history.
But this engine was built about 1922-23, one of several wheel classifications 080 locomotives. That means it has no pilot wheels, it has 8 driving wheels, and it has no trailing truck wheels. Those other wheels were there for locomotives that would be operated on the main line to help support the weight and to guide locomotives in and out of curves. But the 2132 as an 080 was designed for one thing, switching cars and maximum tractive effort, maximum horsepower. So all the weight was concentrated on those 8 driving wheels, and it was a very burly and robust locomotive for its time. So it could handle heavy strings of loaded coal cars at places like Corbin or other yards scattered around the L&N Railroad. It was a universally universal and very versatile piece of equipment for switching cars and shunting cars and putting trains together and breaking down inbound trains into smaller trains, and that's what it did.
L&N 2132, of course, was a steam locomotive, is a steam locomotive, coal-fired. Of course, it takes a large amount of water and heat to create steam, to create the movement, to make those arms move and get the wheels to move forward or in reverse. L&N 2132 is a marvel. She is a technological marvel of her time and one of the very few that remain. We know that after leaving the South Louisville shops, L&N 2132 spent a substantial amount of time working at the DeCourcy yard just south of Cincinnati. We have photographic evidence to tell us that L&N 2132 at some point worked in the Hazard yard. And our history dictates to us that L&N 2132 spent her final L&N days at the Corbin yard before being retired and then sold to the Gulf Power Company in Sneads, Florida.
The train was actually in Sneads, Florida. It had been retired. It had been used on a yard as a yard train in Sneads as part of an electrical company. The train had been retired, and I think it was kind of set off to the side. Former mayor here, who is our current mayor's father, found out about the train and made arrangements for the city to go and get it.
My father heard about that through a acquaintance, and then took it upon himself and the city of Bainbridge to rescue it from the abandoned state it was in. So we've got a great city crew, and at that time we did then to a really hardworking group of city employees, and they took it upon themselves to go down and rescue the train.
First, we took a crew down to look at it, our public works crew, see how we would move it. And we wound up getting in touch with a guy that his hobby was building steam engines of that type, replica small steam engine, to help us show how to take it apart, the best way to move it. And I think we moved it, I think it was in 3 pieces. I think we moved the engine, the coal car, and the caboose in three different trips. And we moved it all with city equipment, which was a task at that time. So, and we hauled it here in 3 pieces and then put it back together, laid the track, put it back together. So
then it moved here into a park we have near the river here, and we did minor refurbishment at that point. You know, we are not trained aficionados or experts in that, but they were at least able to stabilize the peeling paint and the rusting metal, and so from then on it sort of became part of our park, more as a place for kids to climb on it and see what a train looked like from that era. You know, for him, it was a project that he felt like it was worth saving, and they were able to do that. And so I know that part of the history he would be proud of, as well as I am, that, you know, not only his legacy kind of lives on with that, but the city of Bainbridge could have a part in seeing it saved from rusting and decay, and see it brought back to where it all began.
We were very fortunate to get the EKU CARES grant that allowed the Tourism Commission to take on a full-time intern from Eastern Kentucky University. And he, you know, our intern is much more of maybe the train buff, the history buff, and he knew that there was an L&N engine still in existence.
So I came to work with Corbin Tourism and Convention Commission as an intern from Eastern Kentucky University because of that CARES grant. we laid out an idea. The first several weeks were brainstorming to lay out an idea about how we were going to facilitate the development of a museum, what stories we wanted to tell within that museum, and then how we were going to do so and involve the city of Corbin, the Corbin Tourism and Convention Commission, Eastern Kentucky University, so that all voices would be heard. We wanted to make sure that everyone's idea about how this should operate and work were far more than just mine and Maggie's, that it was the ideas of the many. I somehow became obsessed with railroad history in the last several years, and through that obsession I started to check out the location of all of the rolling stock that was available, particularly steam locomotives. Steam, for whatever reason, gets my attention, and the sound of a steam whistle really transcends me into another time, into another place. I can sit in the mountains in North Carolina or in West Virginia and listen to steam locomotives all day long. There's something really nostalgic about steam locomotives, the sights, the sounds. Those things diesel locomotives do not have. So we identified early that we wanted to bring a steam locomotive into Corbin so that folks could do that. We wanted to make sure that the ability to transcend folks on the outside, the exterior of the museum, was available immediately. So we started to identify the locomotives that we thought might be available. Any railroader, any railroad historian, any person with railroad interest could tell you that there were three steam locomotives from the L&N fleet that were remaining. And of those three, one of them was actually built in the South Louisville shops. There were several telltale signs as to how we identified that, particularly the angled doors from the cab to the exterior. Very telltale of the L&N South Louisville shops. What we didn't account for was that the idea that the engine could actually really come home. We foresaw a very lengthy process in which we would throw out our ideas to the owners of L&N 2132 and hear information back years later. We thought that it would be a very lengthy, very drawn out process.
So we began to look through what the options were, gauging what the city council's reaction to that would be, and then ultimately decided that it would be appropriate for Maggie to come to Bainbridge and actually make a presentation to our city council and formally request that the train be returned to Corbin.
So we worked with Ron to develop background history. We'd worked with Ron to gather the builder's photos, to gather the diameter, to gather the original specifications by which the locomotive was constructed, and all of the locomotive's history. So when we went to Bainbridge, Georgia, to present to the city council, we had not only our side of the story, which was the passionate side by which we want to create that feeling, that nostalgia for the people of Corbin and all who see 2132, but we also had the technical side. We had the technical expertise of Ron Flannery and the L&N Historical Society.
We took the L&N Historical Society president with us, Sid Johnson, and together we approached the city commission and we talked about all the reasons that the locomotive was important to Corbin and why it was important to preserve this artifact for future generations.
I think the city council realized that this train was very important to the history of the Corbin area, the coal industry in Kentucky, and so that's where its history lay, not so much here.
I knew we weren't doing really the complete justice that could have been done for the train. And so I felt like it was my duty to the train and to that history. And not only that, like I said, to my father's history, because he believed it should be saved, that passing it along was the best way to see that happen.
Through friends of ours in the L&N Historical Society and others in the railroad world, we were able to be turned on to some national vendors who do move trains for, all the time. And there was Wasatch Railroad Contractors were the group that submitted the lowest bid, and also for the amount of experience that they had, we felt was awesome. They had an awesome track record. They were the company that was willing to work with us philanthropically.
There was a heartfelt warmth by one of the technical experts from this particular group, because he was a railroader from Kentucky. So we relied heavily on their technical expertise. We worked with them to determine the best route, and were provided a number of options by which to transport the locomotive. We were given a list of pros and cons to bring the locomotive by both rail and by road. We were also delivered with the costs of how we would manage to do that. We eventually decided that a road transport was likely the smartest and safest idea for the locomotive. So on that fateful February trip to Bainbridge, the weather conditions were incredible, both here and there. The locomotive, of course, was placed at a park in Bainbridge, Georgia. So moving the locomotive had to be very special. The lifting of the locomotive required some very particular and careful, cautious expertise.
We were trying to get everything done in an 8-hour period, but that didn't go as planned down in Georgia, so we ended up having to stay that night and cut a couple things off. And we had to draw a couple things on AutoCAD just to double check our measurements, make sure the train was going to fit on the trailer. And so we stayed late and measured that all out and planned it all out. And then whatever didn't meet where our clearance was, we had to get rid of it, which cost for a long night. We had to take the smokestack off, both sand domes, the steam dome, the top of the cab, I don't know what that's called. It's some sort of manifold on top, a steam manifold or something. But that was just to meet the height requirements. And it was loaded on the trailer.
Had to remove a lot of stuff off the top of the locomotive to get the bridge, or get the overall height down low enough to get under bridges. We had several bridges that we had to be under 16 foot tall when we were loaded, so had to cut a lot of stuff, remove a lot of stuff off the top to get the height down. Fighting with the different agencies from the states and the cities involved, we're just trying to get everybody on the same page so we can let us come through.
It took a little longer than I wanted it to, but It's here now.
It's still a little bit surreal, you know. Just this morning, you know, I was like, wow, we have a locomotive sitting down, you know, on Depot Street in downtown Corbin. And I know that the majority of the citizens of Corbin never thought they would see a steam engine in Corbin again.
What we find really interesting is that L&N 2132 was retired from the Corbin yard and actually returned home from her final working location. Certainly she was constructed in Louisville and spent years working in Cincinnati metro area, the northern Kentucky area. But the true heart of the Class C1 switcher was an Appalachian coal railroading, and she left Corbin only to return to Corbin decades later.